Undefeated champion faces the reality of real combat, a humbling moment. Welcome to our channel. We're thrilled to have you with us today for another incredible story. As we dive into today's tale, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your thoughts mean a lot to us, and we're excited to connect with you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on tomorrow's special story. We upload new content every day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's get started. Ryan Carter, a 32-year-old martial arts champion, stood outside Buckingham Palace, his eyes scanning the surroundings. With an undefeated record and several international titles, Ryan had built a reputation as one of America's top athletes. His Instagram bio, undefeated, untouchable, unstoppable, reflected the confidence that had driven him to success in the world of combat sports. But today, that same confidence would lead him to underestimate something far beyond his usual competitors. As tourists gathered around, eager to witness the iconic changing of the guard, Ryan looked at the British Royal Guard with a sense of disdain. He scoffed at their stillness, their rigid formality, and the ceremonial posture they maintained so perfectly. In his world, where martial arts and combat were everything, such stillness seemed absurd. He adjusted his designer tracksuit, the fabric flowing easily with every movement, contrasting sharply with the immovable stance of the soldier, William Harris, who stood at attention in his scarlet tunic and bare skin cap. Ryan couldn't help but voice his thoughts. In my world, a fighter who stands still is just asking to get knocked down. Ryan's entourage, his loyal followers, nodded in agreement, a silent show of support. They were all part of his elite combat system, a group of dedicated fighters who followed his every move. To them, it was clear. The Royal Guard wasn't just a symbol of tradition, but a target waiting to be taken down. Ryan had no respect for what he saw as outdated ceremonial training. He approached the guard, his movements fluid and practiced. Every punch, every jab, was an exaggerated display of what he believed was real combat. He didn't hold back, sending quick jabs just short of Harris's face, showing off his control, the speed of his reflexes. "This is the difference between real combat and ceremonial nonsense," Ryan announced to the growing crowd. His voice carried with the confidence of a man used to winning, but in his arrogance he failed to see the soldier's quiet strength. Ryan was so sure of himself, but what he didn't know was that the guard's discipline came from a much deeper place than ceremony. It was built on years of real-world experience in places far more dangerous than this palace courtyard. In his eagerness to prove a point, Ryan set the stage for a confrontation that would quickly humble him. Ryan, confident in his expertise, moved closer to the British Royal Guard, William Harris. His footsteps echoed against the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as he continued his assessment of the soldier's posture. Every part of his being seemed ready to demonstrate the superiority of his martial arts skills over what he viewed as a pointless tradition. To Ryan, the guard's perfectly still stance, the rigid discipline that kept him locked in position for hours, seemed nothing short of absurd. He had trained for years, facing countless opponents who were just as committed as he was, pushing himself to the limit in every competition. Yet here in front of him stood a man whose only apparent goal was to stand motionless. The crowd had grown larger, drawn in by the spectacle, some excited by the unexpected drama unfolding, others sensing the tension that Ryan's behavior was creating. But in that moment, Ryan's focus narrowed. His entourage, standing a few steps behind, formed a semicircle of support, making it clear that this was no ordinary encounter. He was about to show these onlookers the real difference between fighting and just standing still. "Look at him," Ryan said, his voice laced with derision as he motioned toward Harris. "This is what they call security?" He moved around, the guard with ease, every step a demonstration of fluid motion, of readiness. A real fighter is always on guard, always moving. This guy, he's just performing. Ryan jabbed the air in front of him, showing how easy it would be to knock the guard down in a real fight. The tourists around him exchanged uneasy glances, some stepping back, unsure of what they were witnessing. A few shook their heads in quiet disapproval. But Ryan wasn't listening. He had made up his mind. Ryan's attack continued with a series of quick jabs, just stopping short of Harris's face, a deliberate show of control. But to anyone watching closely, it was clear that his blows were more for show than for any real purpose. His stance, though impressive, lacked the depth that came from real-life experience. Ryan's performance was built on technique honed in controlled environments with strict rules and regulations. But the soldier before him had faced real danger, not in a tournament ring, but in the harshest of combat zones. The difference between them wasn't just in their skills, it was in the context of their training, the kind of combat each had prepared for. And it was exactly that, Ryan's underestimation of the soldier's training, that was about to change everything. As Ryan circled Harris, his arrogance grew with each passing second. He had long been used to being the center of attention, dominating every space he entered. And now, in front of a crowd of curious onlookers, he had one goal: to prove just how easily he could shatter the illusion of the Royal Guard's discipline. He didn't realize it yet, but the more he mocked the soldier's stoic composure, the more his own self-assurance would crumble. Ryan's mindset was rooted in the arena, where speed, precision, and spectacle earned admiration. But this was real life, and Harris wasn't there to impress anyone. Colonel James Thornton, watching from the edge of the crowd, couldn't help but feel a sense of growing concern. He had seen enough of Ryan's demeanor to know where this was headed. Thornton had served in combat zones, experienced the brutality of real warfare, and understood the depth of discipline required to survive in such environments. He also understood how easily someone with Ryan's mindset could be blindsided by the reality of military training. Real training, not for an audience, but for life and death situations. Ryan's taunts only grew louder as he moved with practiced ease, displaying the fluidity of his martial arts background. "This is what they do?" he said, his voice carrying to the crowd. "They stand there like statues." His words were dripping with disdain. He was convinced that the static guard's posture, the lack of movement, was a sign of weakness. Ryan continued to jab and circle, demonstrating his fast reflexes, believing every move would prove him right. But the reality was, his performance lacked something fundamental. It lacked awareness, the kind of awareness required when facing an opponent who wasn't there for a show, but for a purpose. Ryan had missed something critical in his assessment. This was not about putting on a show for tourists. Harris had spent years enduring the trials of real combat, facing danger, making split-second decisions that could determine life or death. And in that moment, with every jab Ryan made, it was clear the Royal Guard was prepared for much more than just standing still. They were trained for resilience, for mental and physical endurance honed through countless hours of practice and real combat experience. The shift was coming, but Ryan was too caught up in his own performance to see it. The crowd's uneasy murmurs grew louder, their discomfort palpable as they began to sense the rising tension. Ryan was about to learn, in the hardest way possible, that there was a stark difference between performing for an audience and surviving in a real-world confrontation. And that was a lesson he was about to receive firsthand. Ryan's arrogance reached its peak as he moved closer to Harris, his bravado spilling into every word. "Let me show you how a real fighter moves," he declared, his tone dripping with condescension. The crowd watched in silence, unsure of what was about to unfold, but Ryan was oblivious to the unease around him. To him, this was just another opportunity to prove his superiority, to show the world that his martial arts training, honed in the ring, made him untouchable. He was about to cross a line he hadn't even realized was there. With a sudden shift in posture, Ryan launched into a series of quick jabs aimed at Harris's face, each movement an exaggerated display of power. The audience watched as Ryan danced around the guard, showing off his speed, his agility, and his perceived superiority. His strikes were controlled but flashy, made for an audience, not for an actual fight. "Every move I make is designed for one purpose," Ryan boasted: victory. He performed his moves with the grace of someone used to being applauded. But what he failed to understand was that this wasn't a performance for a crowd. It was an encounter between two very different types of combatants. As Ryan circled Harris remained completely still, his face expressionless, his posture unwavering. The guard's stillness was more than just physical. It was a mental control, the kind Ryan couldn't possibly fathom. To the untrained eye, it looked like weakness, a passive stance that would be easily exploited. But the truth was, Harris's discipline came from something far deeper. His stillness wasn't a sign of vulnerability. It was a reflection of years spent in real combat, where every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated, and the consequences of failure far too high to be swayed by bravado. Ryan's demonstration of skill was met with little more than silence from the crowd, some of whom had begun to back away, sensing the mounting tension. The tourists were clearly uncomfortable, their faces shifting from curiosity to uncertainty. A few murmured among themselves, shaking their heads at the escalating display of aggression. Colonel Thornton, now observing more closely, could see exactly what was happening. Ryan was digging himself deeper into a hole, unaware of the danger he was provoking. Thornton had seen this before in soldiers who mistook pride for strength, who underestimated their opponents based on appearances alone. Then, Ryan decided to push further, his ego refusing to let him back down. "You're just standing there," he taunted. "What's going to happen? Are you going to do anything?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably as Harris's gaze remained fixed forward, his composure unbroken. In that moment, Ryan's words echoed louder than his actions, but the lesson was just beginning to unfold, one he hadn't prepared for. Harris's stillness wasn't his weakness, it was his strength. And Ryan was about to find out just how much he had underestimated the guard. Ryan, now fully invested in his self-perceived role as the dominant fighter, prepared for his final demonstration. "Let me show you what happens when you face a real fighter," he sneered, his confidence unwavering. The crowd, sensing the shift in energy, fell into an uneasy silence. They were watching more than a spectacle now. They were witnessing a collision of worlds, one that would reveal the truth behind Ryan's bravado. The tension was palpable, and yet Ryan remained oblivious, still certain that his skill, honed through years of martial arts, would inevitably triumph over the ceremonial rigidity of the Royal Guard. He launched into a complex series of rapid movements, spinning kicks and lightning-fast jabs, each one aimed just shy of Harris's face. It was a display of speed, precision, and control, designed to impress, but there was a flaw. Ryan was performing for the crowd, not fighting with real intent. His moves lacked the true purpose that comes from facing an actual opponent with stakes, far higher than just proving a point. What Ryan failed to grasp was that Harris wasn't there for the spectacle. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to protect, to stand firm, and to embody the discipline that came from a lifetime of real-world combat experience. The spinning kick that Ryan delivered with all the power of a champion was met with a moment of profound silence as it connected with Harris's face. The crowd gasped as the bare skin cap was knocked from Harris's head, spinning into the air. But the guard didn't fall. He didn't stagger. He didn't even flinch. Instead, Harris's head snapped sideways with the impact, but his body remained steady, unwavering. A thin line of blood traced down from his temple, but his eyes, locked on Ryan's, showed no pain, no fear, only cold clarity. This was a man who had faced much worse, a man who had endured far more than Ryan could imagine. Ryan's confidence faltered as he took a step back, his triumphant smirk fading. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed to grow louder in his ears. As he processed what had just happened, Harris hadn't fallen. He hadn't been defeated. He had absorbed the blow, using all of his years of combat training to minimize the damage. The realization struck Ryan hard. This wasn't a ceremonial figure who had been easily exploited. This was a soldier who had survived real combat, where every movement had purpose, and every action could mean the difference between life and death. The crowd, once on edge, now watched with wide eyes, holding their breath. They had just witnessed a stark reality check. Ryan's own bravado had met the hard truth of Harris's experience. It was now clear to everyone. What Ryan had underestimated was not just the man in front of him, but the depth of training and resilience that defined the Royal Guard. And, in that moment, Ryan's perspective was irrevocably changed. Ryan stood frozen, his eyes locked on Harris, unable to comprehend the reality that had just unfolded before him. The crowd, once murmuring with unease, now remained deathly silent. Ryan had expected the guard to fall, to stagger at the force of his kick, but Harris hadn't moved. There was no theatrical collapse, no dramatic display of weakness, just the unwavering resolve of a soldier who had been trained for much worse than a tournament fight. The thin line of blood running down his cheek was a reminder of the real stakes at play, but even that couldn't break his composure. For a moment, Ryan's confidence cracked. His stance faltered as he processed the fact that he had just been bested by someone who hadn't even flinched in the face of his most powerful strike. The world of martial arts he knew so well, a world defined by control, precision, and victory, suddenly seemed inadequate in this new context. Harris wasn't fighting for points or trophies. He wasn't even fighting at all. He was simply executing the skills that had been drilled into him over years of real combat experience. This wasn't about performance, it was about survival. Ryan, still trying to hold on to his bravado, took a step back, attempting to regain some semblance of control. But before he could make another move, Harris sprang into action. It was almost as if time slowed down. The shift from stillness to motion was so swift, so precise, that Ryan barely had time to react. Harris's movement was the exact opposite of what Ryan had been expecting. No flashy gestures, no dramatic flair. Just calculated efficiency, as if every motion had been designed for one singular purpose: neutralization. Harris's strike came in like lightning, a perfect execution of military precision, and Ryan's reflexes kicked in, but too late. The impact sent him staggering backward, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His trained reflexes, honed in tournament arenas, were no match for the simplicity and effectiveness of Harris's combat training. It was a blow that wasn't designed to impress the crowd or follow the rules of a ring. It was designed to end the fight, to keep him down, to protect the objective. Ryan's vision blurred slightly as he tried to recover, but Harris didn't. Give him a moment. The guard's next move was just as swift, catching Ryan's leg mid-air and flipping him to the ground with one decisive motion. The impact knocked the wind from Ryan's lungs, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his own vulnerability. He wasn't in the ring anymore. There were no referees, no rules. There was only the harsh reality of combat, of real-world consequences. As he lay on the cold stone, gasping for air, Ryan's once unshakable confidence had completely unraveled. He realized with a bitter clarity that he had been outclassed, not by someone performing for an audience, but by someone who had spent years in environments where every decision could mean life or death. As Ryan struggled to regain his bearings on the ground, his world seemed to shift in slow motion. The blow from Harris had taken him completely by surprise. He had never been in a situation where his training, his pride, his identity as a champion had failed him so utterly. The realization that his martial arts skills, honed in countless competitions, were irrelevant in this moment struck him like a lightning bolt. What Ryan failed to understand was the profound difference between tournament fighting, where precision and flair were valued, and real combat, where survival and efficiency were paramount. Harris wasn't interested in winning applause. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to neutralize a threat, and he had done so with surgical precision. Colonel Thornton, watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of concern, knew that Ryan had crossed a line. As a seasoned military man, he had seen men like Ryan, confident, self-assured, but completely unaware of the depths of real combat. Training. Thornton had served in enough combat zones to understand that military training wasn't about looking good in a uniform or executing flashy techniques. It was about survival, about mastering the mental and physical endurance required in hostile, life-threatening environments. The harsh reality was that Ryan's tournament mindset had made him vulnerable in ways he hadn't anticipated. Thornton moved forward, his military bearing parting the crowd with quiet authority. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "This is the difference between performing combat and experiencing it," he said, addressing the stunned onlookers as much as Ryan. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his experience. "Ryan, you've spent your life training for a world where the rules are clear, where technique wins you titles and respect. But out here, in the real world, the consequences of failure are far more severe. It's not about showing off your moves. It's about knowing when to react, when to engage, and when to step back." Ryan's eyes, still wide with shock, locked onto Thornton, and for the first time, he saw the difference. Thornton wasn't just an observer. He was someone who had lived through the realities of combat. He wasn't there to win a fight. He was there to complete a mission, to survive. And in that moment, Ryan understood that the kind of discipline Harris had was not something you could display for an audience. It was forged in the fire of real-world experience, in situations where lives were on the line, and there was no room for error. Ryan's ego had taken a crushing blow, but the lesson was far from over. He had underestimated Harris not just as fighter, but as a soldier, as someone who had survived the unthinkable. And now, as Thornton's words echoed in his mind, Ryan realized the true cost of arrogance. It wasn't just about being the best in the ring. It was about understanding the nature of the fight you were in. And in this case, he was clearly out of his depth. Ryan, still lying on the cold stone, felt the weight of the moment sinking in. Every breath he took felt heavier, each one a reminder of how utterly outmatched he had been. His mind raced, struggling to process the fact that his carefully honed techniques, which had once made him a champion, were utterly useless in this situation. He had been so certain that his training, the kind that had earned him international titles and accolades, would easily overcome the ceremonial training of the Royal Guard. But in the harsh light of reality, he saw how wrong he had been. As Harris stood above him, his posture unwavering, Ryan realized that the soldier wasn't just playing a role. He had endured real combat, lived through situations where split-second decisions determined life or death. Ryan's world of controlled competitions, where every fight was governed by rules, was a world of illusion. It wasn't a fight for survival, it was a spectacle. In contrast, Harris had trained for situations where precision, efficiency, and the ability to stay calm under pressure were matters of life or death. And while Ryan had spent years perfecting his craft for a crowd, Harris had spent just as many years perfecting his craft for the battlefield, where every mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Colonel Thornton's words echoed in Ryan's ears, and for the first time, the true nature of combat clicked into place. He had spent years fighting in tournaments, earning trophies and building a reputation. But Harris, standing silent and still, had faced environments where survival depended on a completely different set of skills. "This is the difference between performing combat and experiencing it," Thornton had said. And Ryan now understood. His focus on technique and performance had blinded him to the true purpose of fighting: surviving, adapting, and responding to an unpredictable world. Ryan finally managed to sit up, his body sore, but his mind now clearer than ever before. He had entered this confrontation with arrogance, dismissing the guard's stillness as weakness. But in that moment, as Harris remained calm and poised, Ryan saw the power in restraint, the strength in maintaining composure under pressure. He had underestimated the depth of Harris's training, and in doing so, he had learned one of the most humbling lessons of his life. Real combat isn't about winning points or impressing spectators, Ryan thought, as he slowly got to his feet. It's about knowing when to fight, when to retreat, and when to stay calm. His pride had been shattered, but in its place, a new understanding began to form. The lesson he had received was painful, but it was the kind of lesson that could only come from the harshest of realities. And Ryan now realized that true strength wasn't in his tournament victories. It was in the discipline and resilience that came from years of real-world experience. As Ryan stood up, his mind raced, still grappling with the humbling experience he had just endured. His body was sore, but it was the sting to his pride that he felt most acutely. The confident, invincible fighter who had walked into Buckingham Palace was now a man who had learned an invaluable lesson the hard way. For the first time, he realized that the skills he had honed over years of martial arts training didn't translate into real-world combat. He had assumed his techniques, honed in a controlled environment where every move was calculated, would work against anyone. But against Harris, he had been proven wrong. As he glanced around, he saw the crowd, silent, shocked, some even with a look of newfound respect for the soldier. The realization hit him harder than anything. The royal guard was not just a ceremonial figurehead, but a trained professional, someone who had seen the harsh realities of combat. Harris hadn't needed to impress anyone, hadn't needed to perform. His training wasn't about accolades or trophies. It was about real survival, about doing whatever it took to endure in situations far more dangerous than any fight in a ring. Ryan's mind replayed Colonel Thornton's words. This is the difference between performing combat and experiencing it. And in that moment, those words held more weight than ever. Ryan's gaze shifted to Harris, who stood there, unshaken and composed despite the blood trickling down his face. The soldier had absorbed Ryan's most powerful strike, not with brute force, but with the kind of control Ryan had never imagined. Harris had used his training not to defeat Ryan in the flashy, tournament-style combat Ryan was used to, but to neutralize him, to end the confrontation with efficiency and precision. He hadn't even been fazed. Ryan had never before encountered such unshakable focus. The crowd, too, had witnessed this shift. What they had thought would be an easy display of superiority from the champion had instead turned into a demonstration of humility. They had seen Ryan's arrogance fade, replaced by the raw understanding of his limitations. The difference between them was clear. Ryan had trained to be the best at fighting for an audience, but Harris had trained to survive in a world where every decision had real consequences. Ryan, still processing the magnitude of what had happened, couldn't help but feel a shift within himself. He had come here to prove a point, to showcase his superiority. But what he had learned was far more valuable than any victory he could have claimed. He had learned that there was more to combat than technique. There was resilience, discipline, and an understanding of when to act and when to remain still. Harris had embodied those traits, and in doing so, had completely redefined Ryan's understanding of strength. As he stood there, humbled and bruised, he finally understood what real combat truly entailed. And that was a lesson he would never forget. As Ryan absorbed the weight of his newfound realization, the crowd around him seemed to fade into the background. The lingering silence was now punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of feet and the distant hum of palace life continuing on. He had come to Buckingham Palace with an air of superiority, ready to prove that his skills were unmatched. But, in a single moment, everything had changed. The confidence that had defined him for so long was shattered, and in its place, Ryan felt a deep, almost reverent understanding of the very thing he had once mocked. Harris, still standing tall with his disciplined posture, hadn't moved a muscle beyond what was necessary to neutralize the situation. His calmness was no longer an act of ceremony. It was a reflection of years spent perfecting a craft born not in the ring, but on the battlefield. Ryan had spent his life training for the spotlight, where winning was a matter of style, control, and performance. But this was different. Harris wasn't interested in performing, he was interested in survival, in discipline, and in doing what was necessary to complete the mission. And in that realization, Ryan saw the flaw in his own approach. The true lesson for Ryan wasn't just in the physical defeat he had suffered, but in the mental awakening that followed. The difference between martial arts and real-world combat was something he had never fully understood until now. He had been too focused on the spectacle, on the applause, on being the best in a controlled environment. But Harris had shown him something far more important, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to endure without showing weakness, and to know exactly when to act and when to hold back. These were the qualities that made someone truly formidable, and Ryan had witnessed them firsthand. As he stood there, facing the consequences of his arrogance, Ryan's perspective shifted. He now saw Harris not as a ceremonial figure but as a soldier who had earned his place through real-world experience. The lessons of the past few minutes had taught him more than any tournament could have. Strength wasn't just about technique or victory. It was about the quiet, unshakable discipline that allowed someone to face the harshest of realities without flinching. Ryan knew now that there were different kinds of strength in the world, and while he had mastered one, there was a far greater power in Harris's kind of resilience, a power built on experience, discipline, and survival. It was a lesson Ryan would carry with him, a humbling reminder that in life, the true measure of strength wasn't how many trophies you won, but how well you could endure and rise above when it mattered most. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this intense encounter. Ryan's journey from arrogance to humility is a powerful reminder of the difference between competition and real-world combat. What did you think of Harris's response? Did you see the strength in his stillness? Or do you think Ryan's confidence could have led to a better outcome if he had understood the true nature of military discipline? As we reflect on the story, we encourage you to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to rethink your approach? How did you adapt when faced with an unexpected challenge? We're excited to hear from you. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Your comments mean the world to us, and we'd love to keep this conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on our next powerful tale. We upload new content daily, and trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Join our community, and let's continue exploring these profound stories together.